Whether conjured in haunted hayrides or Hollywood, we follow the folklore and fright makers who shaped an empire of fear. Behind every scare is a journey. This is Working the Fright Shift.
Clock into Working the Fright Shift, the gateway between imagination and fear, with your host, Ted Doherty.
Welcome, this is Ted Doherty, and you have clocked into Working the Fright Shift, where fear finds its form and stories breathe in the dark. The incredible sound designer Dan Bieranowski joins us tonight, but first, we set the stage with this week's Horror Blueprint.
The Horror Blueprint, the art behind the fear.
Step into the ink-dark corridors of one of horror's foundational voices, Edgar Allan Poe. This dude didn't just write scary stories, he reshaped how we imagine fear. Whether it's through haunted houses, pop culture, or psychological unraveling. So grab your candle and lock the door behind you. Let's dive into Edgar Allan Poe. Now, before he became the poster boy for Gothic terror, Poe was a young man plagued by loss. Born in 1809, orphaned by 3, bounced between cities. He lived in the cracks of society. He started publishing in his 20s, always chasing stability through poetry and prose. His influences: Anne Radcliffe's Gothic romances, Lord Byron's dark charisma, and the chilling precision of German writer E.T.A. Hoffmann. But Poe added something new: interior dread. His stories weren't just scary, they were psychological. I'm going to highlight 5 core pieces that shaped the Poe playbook and why they still matter. Number 1, of course, the biggie, The Raven. This poem made Poe famous. A man mourning his lost love confronts a bird that speaks only one word: nevermore. It's grief, obsession, and doom wrapped in haunting rhyme. Then there was The Telltale Heart, a confession from a murderer who swears he's sane. What gives him away? The sound of the victim's heartbeat coming from under the floorboards. It's pure psychological horror. I remember I heard this on vinyl somewhere as a kid, and it totally freaked me out. Then there was The Fall of the House of Usher. A crumbling mansion mirrors a decaying mind. And then The Mask of the Red Death, a masquerade party during a plague where death crashes the scene. And then there was The Cask of Amontillado, a revenge tale ending in live burial. It's about pride, irony, and the cold precision of payback. Each of these works taps into fear on a personal level, not just what's in the dark, but what's rotting inside of us. And let's talk about how Poe's stories got the film treatment, those moody, blood-tinged films that defined Gothic cinema in the 1960s and 70s. Here's a couple examples. The Pit and the Pendulum from 1961, directed by the legendary Roger Corman and starring one of my favorites, Vincent Price. The film's climax with the swinging blade was so iconic that it inspired a trap in Saw 5 decades later. Next, The Tomb of Ligeia, 1964, another Corman-Price collaboration. This one explored necrophilia, memory, and possession. Vincent Price wore tinted sunglasses throughout the film to suggest his character's sensitivity to light, a subtle nod to Poe's obsession with sensory distortion. Then there was The Oblong Box from 1969, directed by Gordon Hessler and starring both Vincent Price and another one of my favorites, Christopher Lee. This one took its title from Poe's story but added voodoo and colonial guilt. It was the first time Price and Lee shared the screen. These films didn't just adapt Poe, they stylized him, turning his psychological horror into lush, technicolor nightmares. And they helped cement his place not just in literature, but in the visual language of fear. Another great example was The Telltale Heart from 1953, an animated short directed by Ted Parmalee. This haunting adaptation uses stylized animation and narration by James Mason to bring Poe's psychological horror to life. The animation's surreal visuals mirror the narrator's unraveling sanity, making it one of the most artistically faithful renditions of Poe's inner torment. It starts with the great quote, "This story is told through the eyes of a madman who, like all of us, believed that he was sane." It's on YouTube. You should check it out. Poe's stories were tailor-made for adaptation, even when he's not the main character. 2012's The Raven. John Cusack plays Poe hunting a killer mimicking his stories. It's part biopic, part thriller, not perfectly factual, but poetically grim. Then even The Simpsons' Treehouse of Horror, The Raven. James Earl Jones narrates, Homer plays the tortured narrator. It's proof that Poe's themes resonate even when animated and flipped upside down. And what about his legacy? Because Poe shows up everywhere. What about the NFL? Baltimore Ravens. Yes, they are named after the Raven. Baltimore was Poe's final resting place, and their mascot, Poe, is a featured wink to literary dread. Then at Halloween Horror Nights, 2011's Nevermore, The Madness of Poe, Universal Orlando transformed Poe's psyche into an actual walk-through maze. Guests wandered through twisted versions of the Pit and the Pendulum, the Black Cat, and the Telltale Heart. It was killer. I loved it. It felt like you were stepping inside of his brain, fragmented, lyrical, deeply disturbing. That same year, Busch Gardens Hollow Scream had a maze named Nevermore. Also, this attraction played like a haunted theater staging Poe's greatest hits. Then, a couple years later, Not Scary Farm, 2013's Forevermore. This one reimagined Poe as the muse behind a serial killer. Every room staged a murder inspired by his works. You weren't just reading the stories, you were walking through crime scenes that felt like fan fiction turned deadly. But Poe did not just write horror, he dissected it. He proved that fear isn't a ghost around the corner, it's guilt, grief, and madness clawing from within. His characters are haunted by ideas, not monsters. That shift from external threat to internal decay is what makes him foundational to Gothic horror, and it's exactly what haunt designers, filmmakers, and artists keep coming back to. His influence reaches from candlelit writing desks to fog-drenched attractions. Whether you're reading, watching, or walking through a maze, Poe is there, whispering, scratching, reminding you that madness is always just beneath the floorboards of the horror blueprint. From sketches of suspense to foundations of fear, the horror blueprint laid it all out. Now it's time to meet one of the creators of fear itself. In the shadows of every scream, behind every chilling whisper and echoing footstep, there is an architect of fear, one who shapes the unseen and orchestrates the dread. Tonight, we step into the sonic underworld with Dan Bieranowski, a master sound designer whose haunting audio landscapes have shaped the nightmares of Not Scary Farm, Los Angeles Haunted Hayride, Queen Mary's Dark Harbor, and countless Halloween events across the country. From ghostly groans to immersive ambience, Dan's work doesn't just accompany the scare, it amplifies it. As his soundscapes echo coast to coast, we dive into the ghostly origins, creative process, and future visions of one of Halloween's most haunting voices. Dan Bieranowski, a fear architect behind some of the most unforgettable frights.
Fear Architects, crafting worlds of terror.
Welcome to Working the Fright Shift. Dan, thank you so much for being here. Dan, how are you doing?
Doing great. How are you?
Oh, I can't complain. Thank you again so much for doing this. Where are you calling in from today?
I am in Southern Washington State, just outside of Portland, Oregon.
Okay, a little ways from Southern California. Appreciate you being here. Dan, I have questions for you. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, first off, starting way back to the beginning. What first sparked your fascination with Halloween and the darker side of sound?
That's a good question. One of the first memories I have of Halloween is in 1989. I was like 4 years old. It's either 89 or 90. Halloween 4 had just come out, and my dad was watching it. And I can remember the opening scene from that movie, and it stuck with me for a long time. And then when I was 9 years old, friends took me, my brother, my grandmother, and my grandfather to Knott's Scary Farm. And that was 1994. And so those two things, seeing scary movies as a little kid and then going to Knott's Scary Farm for the first time were pretty pivotal and got me involved and excited about Halloween and sound design and design in general.
What was it like that first time you went to Not Scary Farm?
I was really scared. We waited out in front in line, and I was scared to go in. I had gone to Knott's a lot as a kid. I grew up nearby, but I'd never done the Halloween event. And when we went in, my brother and I were both really scared but really excited. My brother's 2 years older than me, and our friends' family that brought us, they also had kids the same age as us, and they had been before. They went the year before, so they knew what to expect, and we didn't. And a monster came up behind one of our friends, right at the front gate, right at main gate. It came up to one of our friends, scared our friend who's like 11 years old. I remember our friends screaming really high pitched, really loud, and the monster like responded in a funny way, like put his fingers in his ears, like, oh, it's too loud. That was the first thing that happened after we walked through the gates, and it immediately eased the fear and made us realize, like, oh, this is supposed to be fun, not just terrifying. Like the interaction with that monster and the monster responding in a humorous way made it a lot more fun for us right off the bat. So we felt a lot more comfortable, and then the rest of the night was just purely fun. We got jump scared and stuff, and the park is gruesome and such, but it was more playful than I had thought while waiting in line. It's like when you're on a roller coaster and you're going up the lift hill. It's really scary, but then once you go down the other side, you start having fun. That's what that was like for us. And so from that moment on, now I turned 40 this year. It's all been the fun part of that. But just waiting in line in front of the park was really like nerve-wracking. There was a lot of anxiety in 9-year-old me waiting to go in.
How did you get into the business of sound design?
In 2006, I was a monster at Knott's for 1 year. It was really difficult. It wasn't as much fun as I thought it would be. I got sick like the second week. I was 21, and I was like thinking it would be a party for a month and a half, and instead I was just sick most of the time. That was my first experience working at Knott's. Right after I got done working that event, I went to recording school. I started going to recording school in November of 2006, not thinking I would do anything sound design wise. I wanted to record bands because I had been in bands my whole life. And then I got through recording school, which was a 9-month program or something like that, 1-year program. And they said you have to do an internship to graduate. You have to have 50 intern hours. And I called Disney, and Disneyland said, we don't do internships. You should call Knott's. And I already knew, somewhat about the audio stuff at Knott's from being a monster there. So I talked to the folks at Knott's, and they said, we don't do internships, but if you know your stuff, we'll just hire you. So they hired me in as a normal tech. So I ran audio for like the Wagon Camp show and the Saloon show and Camp Snoopy Theater and all that. And then that worked its way into me doing audio and installs for Haunt and then doing sound for Haunt. The first Haunt stuff I worked on was by necessity. It wasn't something I applied for or asked for at all. They knew I had experience in recording, and the event was going to open in like 2 days, and they were behind on some audio design stuff. They're like, we need to get this done. Can anybody help? Dan knows how to record. Dan, can you do some sound design for us? So that's how I ended up actually doing design for Not Scary Farm, was out of necessity. It wasn't anything that I even had planned. I desired to do it, but there weren't openings in the design department. They ended up needing the help, and I was able to jump in and help them out. And then I never really went back. I just stayed in design the rest of the time.
I'm sad to hear that your experience as a monster was so ridden with illness. Where were you a monster at?
I was a monster in the fabled and famous Dark Realm with Laser Rage, which was it was a scare zone first, and it was like a along the cart trail, like the horse trail in the back of Camp Snoopy, in the old version of the Gauntlet. And then they changed it from being this like part of a scare zone to being a maze. And all they did was throw some random props in there, some barrels, and they gave the monsters these neon green giant laser tag guns. And they charged the guests $5 to walk through with a laser tag gun and shoot at us. But I didn't want to be a laser tag player. I wanted to be a monster. So I would just hide my gun like behind a prop barrel and scare until our talent captain would walk through and say, you need to grab your gun and start playing the game again because we're trying to generate money. And I was not a fan of that. And then later on, when Infected came about, I went into it very dubious that it was going to work out because I had such a bad experience, like trying to force these customers to spend money to play laser tag with monsters. And it turned out the exact opposite. It was incredible and fun, and they didn't have to pay extra to do it. And it was a million times better implementation. So I'm sure they took what they learned from that back in 2006 and somewhat applied that. But it got a lot better once Infected rolled around. But back then, yeah. But the mixture between being sick and then also having to play laser tag instead of getting to scare was a little frustrating. But it was part of the gig back then.
Now, you broke up just a little bit at the beginning of all that. So, to quickly summarize, there was a scare zone at Not Scary Farm for a long time named the Gauntlet. And in the early to mid 2000s, they had a miniature scare zone that kind of flanked the edge of the Gauntlet that was on the stagecoach trail, which was called Dark Realm. And it was still a medieval type of theme that followed the Gauntlet. And then they turned the Dark Realm into a post-apocalyptic type of theme.
Yeah.
Turned it into an upcharge laser tag experience, which predated the very, very popular Special Ops Infected that came in years later that was far more successful. But
Yes.
after being a monster, you went to work as a tech. And so for folks who may not be familiar, you were running cables, setting up the speakers, and working on the mixing for live performances at venues like the Wagon Camp and things like that, correct?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
what I was doing. And it was the best job in the world. You know, I was young and learning how to do this stuff live at a theme park all day, every day with my friends. and learning from the best in the industry, like guys like Larry McCoy and Dickie Little and Adam Hankinson on how to do this stuff. And they were kind of mentoring me. It was an amazing time. It was such a great time to be involved. Things were still a little Wild West-y at the park, and we were kind of able to make the magic happen on our own terms a bit, which was really a wonderful thing. And yeah, even now, that was half my life ago. I think back on those times really, really fondly. I worked at Knott's for 14 years, and those first few years were really incredible. And I learned a lot and developed a lot of relationships that continue to this day that mean a lot to me.
I think that's a wonderful thing about Knott's Berry Farm in general. In some ways, especially when it comes to Scary Farm, the tight relationships that we're able to make at an event like that. Now, talking about Knott's Scary Farm, you went on to do design with them for many, many years, but also you have done since sound design for events like the Los Angeles Haunted Hayride, Queen Mary's Dark Harbor. How do you tailor your soundscapes, your sound design to match each event's unique tone and story? Because they all are very different from one another.
Some of it is personal experience. I remember going to Queen Mary as a kid. I remember going to Griffith Park as a kid and having that, those memories of being in those physical spaces. Sometimes I do sound design for stuff that I don't get to visit personally. So I try to look up historical info. I did some stuff for an old 100-plus-year-old mansion that's in San Francisco that I didn't get to go to physically. So I looked stuff up online, whatever, and try to get an idea of the space itself and its history. And if there's any purported paranormal stuff there, I always like to try to incorporate that a bit. Otherwise, the creative direction does a lot towards getting me there, depending on who I'm working with as the creative director of the experience. Usually they'll have a treatment involved that tells the story or the storyline of the event itself or the attraction itself. Additionally, the technology budget will also impact those decisions because I may be told we can only really do ambient sounds. Like we don't have enough speakers or enough amplifiers or channels or playback or whatever to do individual sounds for each room. So we just need a kind of base sound that will cover the entire event. So that'll affect decision making as well. So I might decide, oh, we're going to go with something a little more ambient and a little less specific to a certain room or a certain, individual sound effect based on our limitations of technology. If we have free reign and we don't really have to worry about limitations, then I can start getting more specific to this room is a bathroom. So I can put in some specific, water drops and things like that that might be bathroom specific versus this room is an old living room that has a fireplace in the corner and we can have a fireplace sound and maybe some creepy classical music or something. So when there's kind of more unlimited budget, I can focus more on each individual scene or set and design appropriately. If the budget's pulled back, then we're looking at a more broad scale sound design, which means it has to be effective in all of the scenes. Despite the visual scenery changing, the audio is going to stay kind of the same. We want to keep it a little bit loose so that it fits all the locations. So that's the other kind of side of that coin is approaching it from a more general standpoint.
Now, even though you can't go to all of these events that you've worked on throughout the years, do you have a favorite haunt moment where you have heard your sound design in action and thought, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I envisioned? What was that like?
Yeah, that's a good question because that's happened a few times. But the biggest one was the first one that we fired up infected in Camp Snoopy. So For anybody listening that doesn't know, Knott's Scary Farm had this had a maze called, Special Ops Infected. Before it was a maze, it was actually part of an entire zone of the park. So rather than being your traditional walkthrough attraction, those first couple years it took up an entire zone of the park. So and that was Camp Snoopy at Knott's Berry Farm. So we set up a advanced playback system rather than having individual scenes in certain rooms. Now we're doing audio for an entire zone that has to tell a story. And it was like helicopters flying around and voiceovers saying to quarantine and such, and then explosions in the distance and gunshots and alarms going off. And you walk by this like not abandoned truck, but like stopped truck, and it had this big giant stereo system with tons of sub and all that playing really loud heavy metal stuff, while these redneck characters on the back, these like militia guys, shooting at the zombies. So we have like this spot area that's specific to that music. And I didn't really know how it was going to work. Said before, I was a little dubious because of my experience with Dark Realm and that laser tag thing. I didn't really know how it was going to work. And when we fired it all up, it was like a moving experience for me. It hit me in a way, like there was a level of pride and appreciation for what my coworkers had accomplished from a lighting and scenic perspective. The system design itself, which people sometimes mistake sound design and system design for each other. Like I design the sound effects, but other folks typically implement the sound system that plays those sound effects. So the system design was unbelievable and just really technologically advanced for the time. And it was an incredible moment in my career, probably my favorite moment, just because of how great it sounded, how everything worked, and how immersive it was. The next best thing was like the first time we fired up Dark Ride, I think, because Dark Ride, you spend time in the ride and it's working, quote unquote, and then it kind of fails. The audio kind of degrades as the ride goes between being a working ride and a broken ride, and hearing that all work. And when you move to the quote backstage areas of the dark ride, and how the audio would change for those moments worked so well and sounded so awesome. That was a really, really big one for me as well, and it's just another one of those things where it was just so immersive. I didn't expect it to sound as good as it sounded because I do all the design in a studio. I don't know what it's going to sound like in the maze until we get in there and load everything up. And sometimes it really works. And that was another example of that.
Two great examples. And the good news is, I think the early iterations, versions of Infected as well as Dark Ride are out there on YouTube. So for folks who are curious about these attractions from Not Scary Farm, can check them out. Can you share your experience in The Conjuring Beyond Fear, which is a much more involved attraction? I've described it as immersive theater meets haunted house. What was it like for you in terms of designing sound for The Conjuring Beyond Fear?
It was flattering to be involved. It was a really, really cool attraction. The design team behind it, which, yourself, John Cook, other folks that have a ton of history and experience in these attractions, wanted to take these experiences to the next level. I was happy to be along for the ride for something like that. I consider it to be a flagship attraction, a next evolution of a haunted attraction. I realized that there has been theatrical elements in haunts before, but not in this type of setting, not theme park at this level, or a more what we'll call traditional haunted attraction being pushed forward like this. In the past, the closest that I would say we've gotten to something like this would be the pre-show of Paranormal Inc., which was 60 seconds of a show, and then you move into a traditional kind of walkthrough attraction. This takes that concept, but it multiplies it. It puts it throughout the attraction. You have several individual storytelling show moments that are interactive with the audience. I guess ultimately you're part of a storyline rather than passively enjoying a walkthrough attraction. You're now actively enjoying the attraction, and you're able to do things from a storytelling perspective that you can't do normally, because you walk through a scene for 10 seconds, there's not a lot of story that can be told. But if you're wrapped up in a moment that's 60 seconds long, where there's a character interacting with you while providing exposition, is also engaging you to become part of the story. That's just is just something that I only dreamt of as a kid, going through these types of shows. From a design standpoint, there were new challenges because we had this element of, okay, we need areas where they just walk through, and then we need areas where we have a 60-second kind of timed out show that has to be somewhat loose because the guests are involved. We don't know how long they're going to be in the room. There may be stragglers. There may be people that are rushing out of the room. So we got to kind of make smart technical decisions that will make the storyline continue to work, even with the variables, the human element. And so that provided its own challenges. But, working together, we all kind of came up with plans for executing this, and blown away with how great it turned out. The visual aspects, the set design and the lighting and the projection work and all that really, really pushes the experience over the top. I'm happy with my sound design, but without that visual element to work alongside it, it's not nearly as effective. So I think a really next level evolution of what these attractions can be. And I think it puts a lot of other parks and a lot of other attractions on notice. Like, hey, this is what you have to step your game up if you want to keep doing this stuff at the highest level.
Well, we always appreciate anything that you do for our projects, and I always love working with you on any project. Now, one last fun, lighthearted question. You mentioned you spent a lot of time playing in bands. So you are assembling a Halloween dream band made of horror characters. Who is on vocals? Who's on drums? Who's on guitar? Who is on bass?
I like it. Vocals is Freddie, right? You got to have an entertainer. You got to have somebody who can keep a crowd entertained and enjoying themselves, has some vibe, whatever. And then I think drums is going to be probably Michael Myers, because if you think about his character, he's kind of a driving force. He doesn't change tempo. He's very consistent. So you want that for your drums. You want things to stay consistent and move forward. He never gets tired, right? And drums are a difficult cardio workout. So that's our guy there. Bass is going to be like Jason, right? Because bassists are always kind of bigger dudes. He just seems like a guy that could probably groove a bit. And guitar, that's going to be like probably Pinhead. He seems like a guitar guy. He's got the leather. He's got the leather. He's got the cool hairdo, if you want to call it that. Yeah, I think that's a good lineup. I think that's a pretty solid lineup. Maybe if we have like, I don't know. I feel like you could get, it's horror adjacent, but you could get like a Patrick Bateman in there too, like on keyboards or something, doing something very, Huey Lewis-y in there. But I think that's a pretty solid lineup of legends who will keep the crowd going. I guess bass could also be Leatherface. It's got to be a big dude though. It's got to be somebody with some bulk. That's my my lineup.
What a great lineup. Dan, where can people find you and learn more about what you do?
You can follow me on Instagram at Grandma's Boy, GRAMMASBOY. And if you come to Midsummer Scream, I try to do education panels every year or two. We'll see if I branch out and do Trans World or something else. But I'm always at Midsummer Scream every year. So if you come out to that, feel free to reach out and we can hook up and talk audio. But yeah, you can find me in any of those places.
Dan, thank you so much for working the Fright Shift. Thank you, Dan Bieranowski, our true maestro of mayhem. But before we hit the brakes completely, let's launch into the Scare Archives, where each twist and turn has sharpened my instinct for pacing, punchlines, and scary thrills in echoes of the past.
Echoes of the past. The origins of scare experiences.
Today, we're stepping into a time machine, back to the early days of scare attractions to uncover the strange, chaotic, and surprisingly influential history of the funhouse. We're going to trace how funhouses evolved from whimsical obstacle courses into the blueprint for modern haunted attractions. And yes, I'll be sharing how these early walkthroughs shaped my own work in Halloween theme parks. So grab your burlap mat, watch your step as we crawl inside. So starting off with the basics, a funhouse is a walkthrough attraction designed to disorient, amuse, and occasionally startle guests. Unlike thrill rides, funhouses are participatory. You're not strapped into a seat, you're navigating moving floors, spinning barrels, mirror mazes, and air jets that shoot up from the ground. The earliest funhouses were more physical than psychological. They weren't trying to scare you, they were trying to trip you, spin you, and make you laugh at your own clumsiness. But that physical chaos, it laid the groundwork for something much deeper. Funhouses first gained traction in Europe in the late 19th century, but they really exploded in popularity in the early 1900s, especially at seaside resorts and traveling fairs. One of the earliest documented examples was at Blackpool Pleasure Beach in England, where the House of Nonsense opened in 1911. But the real turning point came when funhouses arrived in the United States, specifically at Coney Island in New York. Around 1902, Steeplechase Park introduced its Pavilion of Fun, which was basically a mega funhouse inside a hangar-sized building. It featured a spinning disc, a massive slide, and a stage called the Insanitarium, where clowns harassed guests with, get this, electric wands. Doesn't that sound exactly what some haunted houses do nowadays? It was chaotic and apparently super popular. From there, funhouses spread like wildfire across American amusement parks, carnivals, and boardwalks. They were cheap to build, easy to transport, and endlessly customizable. By the 1920s and 30s, funhouses had become staples of traveling carnivals and circuses. These versions were often built into trailers, compact, mobile, and packed with tricks. You'd walk through dark corridors, tiptoe across moving floors, and exit through a spinning barrel. One example was the Malton Fair Funhouse, which, according to what I researched, seems to have folded into a single trailer and featured everything from air jets to mirror mazes. These attractions were designed to be modular, and they often borrowed visual language from circus sideshows: clowns, grotesques, exaggerated colors. And this is where things started to shift, because while funhouses were still mostly comedic, they began to flirt with fear. But first, we need to talk about beach boardwalks, especially places like Santa Cruz, Atlantic City, and Ocean City, Maryland. These venues were perfect for funhouses: high foot traffic, seasonal crowds, and a hunger for novelty. The Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk in California had a legendary funhouse with a clown mouth entrance, a 125-foot slide, a spinning tunnel disc called the Human Roulette Wheel, and it operated from the 1920s until the early 1970s, and it was a rite of passage for generations of kids. These boardwalk funhouses started incorporating dark corridors, crooked rooms, and jump scares, early signs of the haunted house genre. They weren't just funny anymore, they were unsettling. And that's how funhouses began to influence the haunted house industry. They introduced the linear walkthrough format. Before funhouses, most attractions were rides or open spaces, but funhouses taught us how to guide guests through a linear path, one obstacle at a time. They also pioneered early forms of environmental storytelling. Think about it: tilted rooms, distorted mirrors, and sensory tricks. These weren't just gimmicks, they were immersive tools. And when haunted houses started emerging in the 1960s and 70s on a big scale, they borrowed heavily from funhouse mechanics. Attractions like Trimper's Haunted House in Ocean City, Maryland, that opened in 1964, and the Haunted Shack at Knott's Berry Farm that opened in 1954, and that was at the park for many years. It's now closed, but these were direct descendants of the funhouse model. And by the way, the Haunted Shack, a permanent attraction at Knott's Berry Farm all those years, was rethemed for the first Knott's Scary Farm in 1973, and it was officially billed as the Monster Maze for the event. So even back then, there was that direct lineage to the haunt. When I started creating walkthrough attractions for Halloween theme parks, there's no doubt that there's influence from the funhouses. Not just the mechanics, but the emotional rhythm. The way it builds tension, releases it with laughter, then ramps it up again and again. In my own work and a lot of other people, we use funhouse DNA to shape the guest journey. Air blasts, leg ticklers, floors moving, crawling, disorienting visuals, sudden reveals. Even the pacing of scares owes a debt to those early barrel rolls and mirror mazes. There's whole books on this stuff, so this is just an overview, but you get the idea. Funhouses taught all of us in the industry that fear isn't just about darkness, it's about disruption. And that's a lesson we carry into every halfway decent attraction presented to the public nowadays. Funhouses weren't just silly sideshow attractions. They were the prototypes for immersive horror. They taught us how to manipulate space, guide emotion, and create shared experiences. They were the first to say, you're not just watching, you are inside the adventure. And in today's Halloween theme park industry, their influence is everywhere, from linear walkthroughs to environmental design, from pacing to sensory play. Funhouses laid the foundation. And if you're building the next great scare attraction, well, you're standing on funhouse shoulders. If you've ever stumbled through a spinning barrel, got confused in a mirror maze, or screamed in a crooked room, you have felt the legacy, and those same screams remain in the echoes of the past. And just like that, our shift comes to a close. Huge thanks to our fear architect, Dan Bieranowski. Within these stories is the blueprint of fear itself, how we face it, how it transforms us, how we create it, and sometimes how it sets us free. If you liked what you heard, do us a favor and tell a friend to tell a friend. Give us a good review, 5 stars, and help spread the word. Thanks for spending your nightmares with us. I'm your host, Ted Doherty. Beast wishes, and until we meet again, it's officially time to clock out of Working the Fright Shift. Working the Fright Shift is written and produced by Ted Doherty. No portion of this recording may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without the prior written and express permission of the producer. All opinions expressed in this recording are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily reflect the views of the producer or affiliates. For more details, visit www.workingthefrightshift.com. Copyright 2025, Ted Doherty. All rights reserved.